shalom, everyone, from a good warm summer day here in Irving, Texas. And we're going to pick up where we left off in Matthew 12 today. I've got a little material prepared, so I don't really believe we're going to get through all of Matthew 12 today. Because I got some material ready that's pertinent to actually the first few verses here. Matthew 12, verse 1. At that time, Joshua went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck the grains and then began to eat. Isn't that imagine? These guys are traveling and they're getting hungry. They had to pluck through the grain fields. Why? Because back in that day, they didn't have a Buc-ee's or they didn't have a Fuzzy's Taco Shop or anything else they could stop at, right? You had to stop and pluck the grains on the side of the field. We're going to address exactly what that means here momentarily. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said, "Oh, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Boy, they thought they had him this time. They've been trying to kill him and crucify him and stone him and everything else, and they just knew they had him this time, right? So they thought. Verse 3. Actually, I'm going to stop here a moment because technically, remember, this is on the Sabbath. This is the setting here. I'm going to stop here a moment. They went to the grain fields, and it was on the Sabbath. The disciples got hungry, verse 1, and they began to pluck the heads of grain. Now, Joshua didn't say, "Hey, stop that. It's the Sabbath. What's wrong with y'all?" No, he didn't say that. That was the Pharisees. And in a manner of speaking, because I remember several years ago, I heard a very popular minister of our walk in our way, if you will. This is before I became familiar with the names, before this congregation as we now know it existed. It was back in my time in CGI, if I remember correctly, Church of God International. And he made an interesting comment on this. And I'll let y'all decide what interesting means. Because he was discussing this passage or one of the parallel passages found in either Mark or Luke, and this very story. And he made a comment that kind of startled me. He made the comment, he said something to the effect, now this is the trouble the law can get you into sometimes when you're trying to keep the law. Something to that effect. And the way his comment, the tone of his voice, the words of his comment, made it sound like he was having trouble with the law itself. This is the kind of trouble the law can get you into. Because sometimes in order to do one thing rightly, you have to do something else wrong. Or something to the words to those effects. I don't remember the exact words, but it kind of shook me up a little. But here this guy is supposed to be very I'm not going to give his name. He's dead and gone now, but some of y'all old timers may know who I mean. May figure it out. I got a couple nods in the back already. And that kind of troubles me. No, because what we're going to learn here is not doing what the law says can get you into trouble. Or in order to obey one term of the law, one snippet of the law, one law of the law, if you will, we have to break another. No. It's all how we interpret it and apply it. Is how we're going to get out of it. Because we're going to do a little bit of line on line, precept on precept here. We do that a lot here. That's in Isaiah 28, verse 10. So, and he went on to say, he said, and on this point in the law, he said, well, the scribes and the Pharisees, they had him this time. And I'm sitting back like, whoa, what? Not out loud, but what troubled me, so many members of the audience were kind of sitting, leaning forward, oohing and ahhing what this guy said. And I'm leaning back, I'm thinking, this don't sound right to me. Or is it just me? But in any case, the lesson here is that even in the Sabbath-keeping churches, we can have issues with doing and living up to what's written here.
Curtis, could you repeat that? What did he say?
He said, well, if we go by it as written, he said, the scribes and the Pharisees really had him this time. Those were his words, or something very much like that.
So he was in favor of the scribes and the Pharisees.
Well, he sounded like he was leaning toward the direction that the scribes and Pharisees were correct on this point.
That's not good.
Well, and he didn't have a subtle, very good explanation for. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember not being satisfied with the explanation that followed after his commentary. I'll say it that way. And in a manner of speaking, they were technically, what I would call today, technically correct. I'll phrase my thought that way, but they were wrong in so many other ways. And where they were wrong was it was in the issue of their understanding and their application and their failure to consult the whole word. Now, where were they technically correct? Well, they were doing, verse 2. You could even, I'm not even sure they were technically correct, but here. But at least by outward appearances, you might suggest. And even that their technical correctness was pretty shallow, if you know what I think. And we're going to see that as well. As after all, work was prohibited on the Sabbath. Let's read a few verses on this. How about that? Let's go back to Exodus 16. Hold your place in Matthew 12, by the way. Let us go back to Exodus 16. This is the account of the manna. When Yahweh begins laying down the manna for the Israelites to eat. Because by this time they had run out of all the food they had packed. Their picnic baskets and so forth, whatever it was they had packed, they were empty by now. Exodus 16. And let's try the first 5 verses. They journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the 2nd month they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we'd only died by the hand of Yahweh in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and we ate bread to the full." That's a little wishful thinking. That's kind of a little tarnished memory, don't we think? All they did up to that point was cry about how harshly they were being treated. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill us, to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Oh, you brought us out here just so we can starve us to death. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not." So this is a test, whether they were going to do what he said. And what he'd do, he rained down in the morning. He would rain down the bread from heaven, and before the sun got hot, they were to go out and gather it. And because what would happen to it if they waited for the sun to get hot? They slept into like 10, 11, 12 o'clock, and they'd miss out. It was hot and would melt away. So they had to get up early to gather in this stuff. And let's drop down to verse 13, please. So it was when the quails came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay around all around the camp. When the layer of dew was lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance as fine as the frost on the ground. When the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread of which Yahweh has given you to eat. This is the thing which Yahweh has commanded. Let every man gather it according to one's need, one omer for each person according to the number of persons. Let each man take those for those who are in his tent." Some of the children of Israel did so and gathered, some more, some less. When they measured it by the omers, he gave as much. He who had gathered much had nothing left over, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered according to each one's need. And Moses said, "Now, no one leave any of it until morning." Nonetheless, they did not listen to Moses. But when some of them left part of it until morning, it bred worms and it stank, and it rotted, and it was turned to worms all night. Flies were coming out of it and everything. Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. And when the sun came hot, it melted. And it was so on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said to them, "This is what Yahweh has said. Tomorrow is the Sabbath rest." It's the Sabbath. "A holy Sabbath unto Yahweh. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil. Lay up for yourself all that remains to be kept until morning." So this time they were to gather today on the day before the Sabbath, they were to gather up twice as much. Some for that day, half for that day, half for the Sabbath. So they laid it up until morning as Moses commanded, and it didn't stink, nor were there any worms in it. Moses said, "Eat that today, for tomorrow is the Sabbath unto Yahweh. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you will gather, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Imagine that. Yahweh even gave the quail the day off. Imagine that. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Now it happened that verse 20 said, now it happened that some of the people went forth out on the Sabbath day, to gather, but they didn't find any. And Yahweh said to Moses, now how long do y'all refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, Yahweh has given you the Sabbath. As compared to their time in Egypt, all they did was work. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, from sunup to whenever they were told, okay, you're done for the day, whenever the Egyptians were through with them. Yes?
I was just thinking that by Yahweh providing extra food on the 6th day, it gave Yahweh a day of rest as well.
Well, yeah. We just read when the quail came up, and that was when it was left, so. Yeah. He didn't provide anything for them that day. See, Yahweh has given you the Sabbath day. Therefore, he gives you the 6th day bread for 2 days. Let each man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. Okay, they finally got this one. Yes, Tom.
I recall years ago at the Garden Center in Dallas, where I used to attend the Worldwide, I was very new in the faith. Had only been recently immersed, baptized. And the admonition was that on Friday to be a preparation day where we should spend more time, if possible, in prayer and Bible study, anticipating the Sabbath. I looked them at the Word, and I would take notes and write down like I do typically here. And then I had a deacon come to me on the next Sabbath after I started doing that, and then several Sabbaths afterwards, and looking down and said, well, wait a minute, it looks like you've got my notes for the sermonette. It brought the attention of one of the regular elders there, shepherds. And they got really perplexed, and they thought I was a weirdo anyway, because they knew I was from a psychedelic hippie background anyway, and they were a little bit wary of me, even though they didn't look at me like I had two heads. It wasn't that bad. And I said, I'm just taking you at your word and writing down these scriptures as I pray for them to be revelation to me. And then sometime later it came to me, wait a minute, I gave you the spiritual manna, the bread of 2 days. Because Messiah Yahshua says in John 6, all your ancient ancestors except 2, they all died in the wilderness and didn't enter Canaan, is the scripture what it says. And they had no ability to enter into the promised land. But he says, I am the bread of life in John 6. I am the bread of life, which comes down from heaven that gives life to the world. I thought, wow, I was getting the spiritual bread of 2 days because I took them at their exhortation, as others can be proud and said, well, you know, I'm getting this same kind of notes that come out in the sermonettes and the sermons, and thought it was kind of weird. Well, I didn't put it together at the time, but sometime later I did, and I just commend anybody, tried to experiment on a Friday, busy as we can be, spend a bit more time in meditation, prayer, study, and you'll have more to share and edify one another on the Sabbath, according to 1 Corinthians 14:26. That's what blew my mind of how powerful this pattern is way back in this ancient wilderness situation with Israelites that carries right on up, brethren, to these very last times before the return of the Messiah.
Thank you, Tom. Let's try Exodus 31, please. Verse 12, Exodus 31, verse 12. And Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbath you will keep, for it is a sign between you and me throughout all of your generations, that you may know I am Yahweh, who sanctifies you. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person will be cut off from among his people. Work is to be done for 6 days, but on the 7th is the Sabbath of rest, holy unto Yahweh. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he will be put to death. Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. In 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested and he was refreshed. It's a sign, it's a perpetual sign, it says. It doesn't say until the good Lord Jesus come, got hung on the cross and did away with it all. It doesn't say that. It says forever. In Matthew 5, Joshua says not one jot, one tittle of the law will change until heaven and earth pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away first for any of this changes. Any question or comment so far, anyone? Yes, Larry.
Well, I appreciate it. There's a couple cross-reference scriptures.
Go ahead.
Psalms, the 78th chapter, beginning in verse 23. It says,
Okay, go ahead and read that.
says, Though he had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven, and he rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. Okay, it's interesting that this manna is compared, if you do a little cross references, between corn and wheat substance. Okay, and when we think about Yeshua picking these corns of ear in the field,
The grain,
the Pharisees wasn't considering in Deuteronomy the 23rd chapter.
Yeah, we'll go there.
Okay. I'll let you go there.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Yes, we have. Just reference, I'll give you the others I have in reference. That's Leviticus 23, verse 3. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, especially verse 9. And Exodus 35, verses 1 through 3. That's what was written about the Sabbath and not any work being done on Sabbath, and the reference Larry made in Psalm 78. You can write that one down too. So, what were the? This actually segues right into what Joshua and the disciples were doing, because what they didn't, and that was a part that you're like I already said, they did not take into consideration. Leviticus 23. If I'd bothered to look down my notes a bit further, I think we were about to go right into there. But Leviticus 23. Is that what you said, Larry?
Deuteronomy 23.
Okay. Deuteronomy, all right.
That really shows the difference of what they were doing versus work on the Sabbath.
Right, definitely.
Well, what I found was in Deuteronomy 20. Wait a minute, Deuteronomy. Yeah, what they were doing in plucking heads. That's Deuteronomy 23, verse 25. You're right. I'm looking across the page wrong. I'm sorry. When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you will not use a sickle on your neighbor's standing grain. That means the fringes, the edges of the field by the roadway. They weren't supposed to just take a sickle and a sack and go out there and just cut what they will. You know, cut a couple big old sacks and take it home. Because that would be stealing. That would be theft. Against the commandment says, do not steal. But along the roadway, travelers, could pass and could, just grab them a few handfuls of grain, pick them a few handfuls of grain and have a snack. Yes, Tom.
Years ago, my cousin and I, and he was considered by my family a bit more, it's a very euphemistic term, mischievous than I was, but he was an influencer. He definitely had a corrupting influence at times on me doing what I wasn't supposed to do. And we would go to this watermelon patch when I lived on a farm, and it was adjacent to where we were on this farm, and get a watermelon. And this guy had a shotgun with rock salt in it. Didn't get me, but he got my cousin in the rear. He had a few things that had to pick out of his rear. So we decided we might refrain from the watermelons. But my grandfather was incensed, and he went to this very same scripture that you're talking about, that ironically, remember, Joshua was accused of breaking the Shabbat because of doing this very thing on the Sabbath in the fields. And what restraint he had not to just cloud and rain all over them, because he was the one pre-incarnate that gave the very provision, because they had no fast food places when people travel, but they had to garner, the people could garner the corners of the field that clearly Torah lays out for the wayfarer and the stranger. And he did that as an example for he and his disciples, and got condemned for doing the very thing that was in their own scriptures. Mm-hmm. Talk about your ancient woke approach to start things for your own political purposes that's clear back here anciently thousands of years ago.
So we're beginning to see the scribes and the Pharisees did not have this right, did they? They failed to consult the whole word. Because what we read in Deuteronomy 23 is what they were actually doing in 23:5. That's what's actually taking place. And the law was silent about when they were to do that, when they could do this, didn't they? Well, they could just pluck in, and as long as they didn't take a sickle to it and a sack, they just use if they picked what they could with their hands and had a snack to satisfy their hunger for a moment. That was quite lawful. I'm sorry I laughed, Tom, but I mean that shotgun full of rock salt. I'm from the country, okay? That sounded fun. I'm sorry.
It was scary.
I bet it was. Because today for what it's worth, today you can buy loads of that buy shotgun loads full of bean bags. They'll do that same purpose. I haven't actually seen any, but I'm aware you can buy loads that you can buy beanbag loads. In any case, when it went through the fields is what was happening, like Larry pointed out. And there's actually a couple other scriptures that address this too. Let's try while we're in Deuteronomy. Let's just leap over to Deuteronomy 24, because this was a commandment concerning the edge of the field. Deuteronomy 24, it's verse 19 through 22. When you reap your harvest in your field, and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, for the widow, that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in all your work of your hands. And when you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again, for it shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And when you gather grapes for your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. Let's try Leviticus 23. Let's try a couple of brief verses out of Leviticus 23, shall we? Or excuse me, let's try one Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19. I wonder it didn't look right. I'm in Numbers. Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10. Again, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field. Leave the corners. Nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, and you shall not glean your harvest. Nor shall you gather every grape in your vineyard, so you shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. For I am Yahweh your Elohim. Any question or comment so far, anyone? Yes, Tom.
The genius of our Creator is just always brings me to a point of thinking, what loving provision for both people that weren't even necessarily remnant children of Israel, Israelites, were traveling. This is a loving chesed, a loving kindness. And in Africa today, we had this huge desert called the Sahara, the northern part of Africa. It wasn't like that, but the Roman Empire and their lack of being in harmony, what we're seeing here, they not only stripped everything away, which it warns about in admonitional terms again and again here in Torah, but they didn't provide the Shemitahs, the land Sabbaths. And so ultimately, over a period of time, it produced, it's kind of hard to say this word, produced this vast desertification of what we know of today as this vast desert. It wasn't like that, historians point out, but they were so greedy and so foolish and so out of harmony with the genius of our Creator about remembering the land, as it says in Leviticus 26, the Shemitahs, that now we had this vast area that's a testimony to, once again, man at his best is altogether vanity.
Yes, Amy.
Dennis commented online that the Hebrew word corner actually is sides or edges.
Yeah, it would be sides or corners, like not just the corner, like the corner of this lectern up here, not just a little corner, but this whole side. There's the side. There are the portions, yes, going from the road a little inward. That was supposed to serve as a side for the poor, the widowless, the fathers, the widows, travelers, people. Yes, Sandra.
Going back to Leviticus 23:3, how does that affect us today? I'm a little confused.
All right, let's come back to Leviticus 23:3. Leviticus 23:3. 6 days' work shall be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest. It is a holy convocation. You shall do no work in it. It is the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings. Okay, but when we consult the rest of the scripture, what we read of in particularly Exodus 16, and you will read of another place about staying in the camps. Instead of the children of Israel going out and performing work to gather gather in the manna where there wasn't any. We're supposed to do the same thing today. We're supposed to stay in our place, if you will. At that time, their place was in their tents, was in the camp. However, today is today the Sabbath day. We don't do things like we don't go shopping, we don't go to work. We don't cook up any massive. We don't cook. We don't cook massive meals in the kitchen, stuff like that. Because if we're busy working all day, we're not going to get the blessing of the Sabbath day rest. And we don't report to our employer either. We don't go to work, whether we handle burdens or not. Because we stay in our place. Now, if we took that literally, we'd all stay home. None of us would be here. But what's our proverbial place? Because we got to remember, this is also a. That's right. It's a holy convocation. What does that mean? We gather. We meet together. So we're in our proverbial tent here, if you will. Our place. This is our place. This is where I'm supposed to be today. I'm not supposed to be out in the world doing whatever. I'm not supposed to be at the ball yard today. I'm supposed to be here. Yes, Sandra.
But how big or how wide or how small rather do we take that interpretation?
I didn't hear you, Sandra.
Yeah, if I can interject here. I think the confusion comes in when we try to analyze what we can and cannot do on the Sabbath, and we take it to the broader aspect of our lives. If we focus on every little thing that we could possibly do in our life and try to nitpick and check the box to say whether we can and cannot, I think that's where we err, because some people are going to have a different comprehension of what the scripture says than others, and then we start to fight and then get in our camps of whether we can and cannot do. When Yeshua, and hopefully we'll finish Matthew 12, Yeshua was trying to explain a concept of when they were walking through the field, they just grabbed the ears to eat. And then the Pharisees were trying to take that and apply it to something back in the day. When they went to go get the manna, they had to carry something with them to put the manna in.
That's right.
And once it was full, they were working because they were carrying a burden on the Sabbath.
Plus the use of the sickle.
Yes, and so those two, if we just focus on those two things, we can then focus on one you shouldn't do, the other is okay to do, because you were not breaking the Sabbath, you were not carrying a burden, you were just grabbing what was there as you were walking. And so, just to go back to that, my comment on that is, when they were in the wilderness, Yahweh was treating them like children. It was black or white. Do or do not do these things. But as, when Yeshua came, he came and said that, you guys should be more knowledgeable of what Scripture says and requires of you. You should be more wise to determine what you should and should not do. And so when we treat children one way, and when you grow up and you have the understanding that you can make the decision to do whatever you want, that's kind of a different concept in my mind. It's not as black and white.
Okay, first Trey, then Tom.
I think the main thing is that we learn everything that you do comes from the inside. So like if their goals were not to gather some grain, harvest it up, take it, sell it. They weren't getting excess for labor. Let's say they grabbed what they needed in that moment, ate, and then they went straight to the congregation to go. He was going to go speak or go listen, whatever the case is, with his taught ones. So for them to sit there and do this, I mean, if you keep reading on, I know we've been on this part for a while. If you keep reading on, he even talks about how how he can be considered blameless, and how there's a thing higher than the set apart place. We'll see when we keep reading in a second. But it's about what you're doing. What was the purpose and intention? It wasn't to gather for later. It wasn't to sell. It wasn't to do nothing. It was simply to stave off a slight hunger, which was allowed, and then continue to go to the congregation to be there with the other people in fellowship. So that there can't be no wrong in that.
Wrong in that.
Tom?
Just to corroborate what Trey is saying, David, who was a man after Yahweh's own heart, when the men were starving, he went in where it was forbidden on the letter of the Torah, which kills, as Paul says, and got the showbread and fed his men, showing there's a higher order having to do with L'chaim, with life, that's even more important than just the sheer naked techniques of the law. And that's like so. And these days, today, I think about that. What am I doing in my motivations internally, like Tracy, that considers the needs of others and my own need, loving my neighbor as I love myself, that has a higher order of life, thriving, flourishing, rather than just having this strict, pharisaical, and in some cases a Sadducee, letter of the law.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and I would say let's just continue reading in Matthew 12 and let Yeshua explain.
All right,
it to
yeah, let's
us.
go back. We're going back to Matthew. But he said to them, this is what Tom just brought up, have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of Yahweh and ate the showbread?
no wonder David wants to go on.
Mm-hmm. And how he entered the house of Yahweh and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priest. Because in places like this was not lawful for the showbread. We got got teachings concerning the showbread in Exodus 25, Leviticus 24, and some more instructions in Leviticus 8, 24, and we got some more in Exodus 29. All about the consecration of the priest. And supposedly it was only supposed to be lawful for the priest to eat because it had to do with their offerings and their work as priests. But then Tom's already explained the other need that concerning David and his men.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point is then we have to ask ourselves the question of why was David not held liable for doing this? Because Yeshua clearly says that it was unlawful for him to do that. But why was he not held accountable for his actions at that point?
Raquel.
It kind of sums it up when you go down to 12, verse 12, when Yeshua said, therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
And I interpret to do good as to be righteous, to act in righteousness, right? I mean, that's, I believe, the spirit of the law in that regard, to act in righteousness on the Sabbath.
Yes, Tom.
There is a principle behind this conversation that I was not going to get into to hold things up for how you want to press on with Matthew 12, but it's so evident to me that when you read in Isaiah, that the Messiah and those that would follow his example would magnify the law of the Torah. Not diminish it, but magnify it. And it literally means in the original Hebrew to make it not honorable. It means to make it great and glorious, where it even has more of a deeper meaning and a significance. And it's just what is the fundamental perception of the purpose of the law. To magnify, to enhance it. Doesn't take away from it, as all these antinomian commentaries in the world have today, tragically, but enhances it, improves it, gives a deeper understanding of the character of our wonderful Creator.
Anybody else? Any more questions? Any more comment? Okay, back to Matthew 12. And we'll answer David's question of why David was not held accountable for here. We're going there shortly, actually. Have you not read in the law on the Sabbath? Because we got a similar principle here. Have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? What does that mean, they profane the Sabbath? Well, you got to remember, it had to do with their offerings and the sacrifices they performed on the Sabbath day. That's a lot of work. You know, when you kill an animal, gut him out, and cook him up, that's work. That's in fact a lot of work. So in that regard, in terms of do no work, the priests themselves profaned the Sabbath. Now they didn't profane it as we read of in places like, he did not mean in places like Ezekiel 8. That was not his reference. Yes.
Would you mind reading the next two lines?
Yeah, no, we're getting. We're getting there. They profane the Sabbath, and they hold him blameless. Before we read there, let me read Numbers. Let's go to Numbers 28 very quickly. Numbers 28. Hold your place, Matthew. We're going to Numbers 28 a moment. We're going to read 2 or 3 verses there. Let's pick it up. Numbers 28. Let's pick it up in verse 9. Verses 1 through 8 were the daily offerings. Now, verses 9 and 10, we're going to read about the Sabbath offerings. And on the Sabbath day, 2 lambs in their first year, without blemish, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, and a grain offering mixed with oil. This is the offering. On the Sabbath, this is on the Sabbath day now. The offering was 2 lambs in their first year, so they were less than a year old, without blemish, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering. So if you got fine flour, this has been very well sifted. You didn't just, not like too many people today, open up a bag and just dump it. No, when it's fine flour, it's been very well sifted, along with this drink offering. This is the burnt offering for every Sabbath, besides the regular burnt offering with its drink offering. So they required a burnt offering and a drink offering. So what did the burnt offering require? To the altar sacrifice, to the altar. And they burned it up, and that meant hauling wood, lighting fires, all this other stuff. Keeping the fire going, all the work back in that day. Remember, they didn't have ovens like we do today. They didn't have gaslit barbecue grills like we do today. Yeah. They didn't have a 20,000, BTU cooker, attached to a Coleman tank. They could just, light a match and light it up. They didn't have that. They had fire the old-fashioned way. And it was enough to burn. Being a burnt offering, what they do, it was enough to burn it up. So they had a real good fire going on that thing. Yet the priests were held blameless. Back to Matthew. But if you had known what this means, evidently these scribes, these Pharisees, these keepers of the law, these religious champions.
Kurt, you missed a line.
Did I miss one?
Yeah.
Oh, you say verse 6. I did miss one. Yet I say to you, there is one in this place who's greater than the temple. That was Joshua himself. Why is he greater than the temple? The answer to that is in verse 1, in John chapter 1. We're not, for the sake of time, we're not going to go there, but the first few verses of John 1. He was with Yahweh, he was Yahweh, with Yahweh, and nothing was created that was without him. In Psalm 110, he is referred to as that great high priest of Melchizedek. We're told about that, how he serves that, and how he was greater than the temple, than the great high priest of Melchizedek. That's explained in lots of detail in Hebrews, in the entire book of Hebrews. Then we got the opening chapters of Revelation. In the introduction, Revelation 1, and the letters, where we're reminded to the churches. We're reminded of this, and all throughout different parts of Revelation. So yeah, he was a lot greater than the temple. Because remember, the temple was destroyed. It's been destroyed twice already. First, back in the day of Nebuchadnezzar, when the Israelites when Judah was taken captive into Babylon, and then later by the Romans in 70 A.D. when they were carried off into captivity.
Hey, Curtis.
Yes, David, then Trey.
So yeah, I think this is a verse where he answers their question. The Pharisees questioned why he allowed his disciples to pluck and eat while they're walking on the Sabbath. It's more of if the actual priests are not and are blameless by doing the actual sacrifice on the Sabbath, then those that are serving him, who is greater than the temple, the priest serving the temple to do these things are not held blameless. Those that are serving him are also not held to be blamed or are held blameless for service to him, which is greater than the temple. Hopefully I got that right.
Okay. Trey.
Just to add a little bit to that, because the direction I was going to go as well, was that ironically, he's the high priest. Like, he's the high priest for this kingdom that we're trying to get out.
Not a Levi, but a Melchizedek, yes.
Yeah. So he's the high priest. So first off, he's saying a priest alone was blameless. They're at a lower position than this. He's the high priest. Second off, he's better than he's more than the set apart place, the temple. So that's like, so essentially he trumps both of these things. He's like, essentially you're attacking me. As he continued to read a little bit further, and he says that next line is really important. He's like, I desire compassion.
I know we're going there. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, I'm desiring compassion and not offering. And the thing is that we just read about how they did all the offers and stuff. He's saying, so he's like, if you thought about this, what he's been saying the whole time, I'd rather have you been doing something like this than killing the animals and doing all that. If everybody was without sin anyways, you wouldn't have to be doing his offerings. You could be out there being compassionate to others and showing love instead.
Okay.
Yes, amen. So be it.
Remaining in Matthew 12. But if you'd known what this means, so we got these champions of the law that didn't. He's making it plain. They didn't understand it. They didn't even know what it meant. If you'd understand what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is even Lord of the Sabbath, or Master of the Sabbath. He desires mercy, not sacrifice, because so many times in the issue of the sacrificial laws, what was the implication? It was sin, correct? We had the sin offering. And that's very similar to the burnt offering. There's a similar between the sin offering and the burnt offering. But for sake of time, we're not going to go there. I'll refer that to you back in, I believe that's Leviticus 6, if I remember correctly. I don't have that written down. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That was Yahweh's pattern. Up to this point, the Father's pattern. He had desired mercy, not sacrifice. He had it in him to desire mercy to people.
Yeah.
And not demand a penalty payment for them or from them.
Yeah, Curtis, could you read that? It's in Hosea 6.
Yes,
6.
we got some notes on there. Well, since you're already in Hosea 6:6, go ahead and read it, David.
Yeah, let me click there. That verse is taken from Hosea 6:6, where it says, For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of Elohim more than burnt offerings. That kind of goes back to the knowledge and wisdom that you develop to decide what is right and what is wrong is better than, just holding people to the letter of the law, especially if they don't actually know the law.
Okay.
And so the mercy of, hey, yeah, you didn't quite get it right, but Yahweh will have mercy on it. But we try to hold people accountable for things that Yahweh probably will have mercy for them on. We're not the judge of them, so we should stop judging.
Okay. Let's try Micah 6, verses 6 through 8. Micah 6, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before Yahweh, and bow myself before the Most High? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings? with year-old calves? Will Yahweh be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? It strikes a memory. I just now kind of occurred to me, but we do have a reading in Torah in Genesis of someone who offered their two sons for his transgression. His name was Reuben. Over the selling of over the issue of Joseph. That could be its own study another time. Verse 8 of Micah 6. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your Elohim? Can we try 1 Samuel 15, please? Verse 22. 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. So Samuel said, has Yahweh a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? You mean he'd rather us just do what he says than offer tons of sacrifices? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he has also rejected you from being king. Question. This was over the issue of Saul, his disobedience, when he did not kill Agag, when he spared him. Is there a similar principle from us being rejected as kings if we don't obey the word? Mm-hmm. Yes, there is. Yes, Raquel, you're correct. Let's try Psalms 50, verse 8, please. Verses 8 and 9. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I was just
Raquel.
gonna say, but the key thing is it's how you obey, right? So, Matthew 4:20, which what you guys read earlier, if we follow the letter of the law, we won't enter the kingdom. That's what Matthew 4:20 said. Because our righteousness has to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. So just gonna wanna highlight that we have to go beyond the letter of the law. Because that's what the Pharisees were doing. They were too extreme about it, right? Just doing the letter of the law.
They really didn't even keep the letter of the law. They were experts at projecting themselves as these champions of the law, so to speak. They didn't do as they said, did they?
They can't if they don't understand the spirit and the wisdom of it, right? Yeah.
Didn't seem to understand too much of it either way, did they, Raquel? No. What did I say? I said Psalms 50, verses 8 and 9. I will not rebuke you for your sacrifice or your burnt offerings, which are continually. I will not rebuke you for your sacrifices or your burnt offerings, which are continually before me. And I will not take a bull from your house, nor goats from your folds. Because every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. And all the birds of the mountains and all the wild beasts of the field are mine. The only thing we can offer in terms of sacrifices is what belongs to him in the first place. Any other questions? Let's try Isaiah 1, please. Isaiah 1:14. Actually, can we back up to... let's back up to verse 10. Let's get a little bit of context here. Hear the word of, we're going to go through verse 14. Hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. This is Isaiah in a prophecy to the children of Israel. Hear the word of Yahweh, you children of Sodom, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the word of our Elohim, you people of Gomorrah. What is the purpose of the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says Yahweh? I haven't had enough of burnt offerings and rams and of fat cattle. I do not delight in the blood of bulls, nor in the lamb of goat or of lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required this from your hand to trample on my courts? What were they doing at that time? That was trampling on their courts. Well, were they not suffering the curses of Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26 at that time? Yes, they were. Their sin had come to that point. They were being occupied by the Romans, ruled by foreign power, and then they were on the eve of being thrust out of the land. Again, bring no more futile sacrifices, and incense is an abomination to me. The new moons, your Sabbaths, and the calling of your assemblies, I cannot endure the iniquity and the sacred meeting. You mean we can't go out and live like heathens 6 days a week, but come here all holy? Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They are a trouble to me, and I'm weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I'll hide my hands from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear them, because your hands are full of blood. The children of Israel, Judah, they were in that same situation at that time, which is why they were suffering the things that they were at that time. Yes, Trey.
I want to expound on something you said earlier, as far as that he made everything. You know, Yahweh, Yahshua, everything was created. So what can you offer him that they did not create? And the only thing would be the emphasis of why faith without works is dead. The only thing that we can truly offer is our works. The only thing we can truly offer is something that we create or manifest through ourselves, being an image of the Father, who is the creator. All we do is create stuff that work on his glory or not. So the only thing, like, that's why we've discussed it a few times about why didn't he just make all humans just listen to him and follow orders and everything, because it'd be just a bunch of robots and there's no family, there's no love, there's no connect, there's nothing, he gains nothing from that. So what was the point of it? Is that he wanted to create a family, he wanted to do that. So the only thing we can offer is our our devotion, the works that we do in the world, and then giving the glory to him, because he can't, that's the one thing he can't give to himself. He, say he could, but it's like he gave it to himself, so it's not that. The only thing we can ever offer him is going to be what we do on the behalf of the Father for his glory.
Tom.
David, David the beloved, in Psalm 116, verse 12 says, I am your servant, and it says in verse 16, and the son of your handmaid, you have loosed my bonds. Well, the bonds he had were holding him back from this great understanding that he says prophetically of the sacrifice of the shed blood of Messiah. Verse 12 of Psalm 116, what shall I render unto Yahweh for all his benefits towards me? This seems to corroborate, I think, what you were saying, Trey. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but towards me. I will take the cup. This is picturing prophetically the blood in the new covenant that Yahshua spoke of at the Pesach. I will take the cup of salvation, or some translations say redemption, and call upon the name of Yahweh. He understood of all the things, what could I do for all his benefits? If I don't stand on that fundamental sacrifice, it's a sacrifice, Paul says, separate, apart from, not doing away with, from the Torah. And David apparently, thousands of years ago, understood that, what I think you were saying.
That's all we can offer, our dedication, our devotion, our vow to him.
His devotion to Yahweh.
Everything else he gave us.
Well, I did have some other stuff prepared for some more Matthew 12, but I see we're out of time. So unless there's any other question or comment,
Well, you want to get that last verse in this concept out.
okay, for the,
Yeah, I think you left one verse.
yeah, no, well, okay, first Raquel, she had her hand up.
Oh, okay. So I just, this is just an observation. You know, when I was reading the seven seals, the seven trumpet,
Right.
the seven bowls, it seems like the Sabbath is observed within that, because if you look at the seals, the sixth seal, it was like cosmic disturbance, right? But the seventh one, there was actually like a you know, there was just like a calm right before the storm. Let's see, Revelations 8, when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour.
Mhm.
So if you look at the seventh seal, it looks like they're observing Sabbath. When you go to the seventh trumpet, it's the same thing where, you know, the angel, they just kind of proclaim the, I guess, loud voices in heaven, right? So nothing really is happening, right? But when I go to the seven bowls, it says that it was 16:17, it is done, right? And then the earth was utterly shaken. So if I go back to Matthew, I guess 5:18, where it says, "For assuredly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled." That includes the Sabbath.
Mhm.
So I just kind of want to show that I just saw the pattern of the
Well,
Sabbath.
that's very possible.
Yeah.
That will also be within Yahweh's pattern when he delivers out punishment on mankind. He'll deliver it to an extent, then he'll give him, he'll give him a break. It's their chance. It's a little break. It's your chance to regather your thoughts, contemplate why you got the spanking, and to repent. But then if we read on, no, they didn't.
Yeah.
Yes, Wendy.
I've gotten to where I don't even ask for anything on the Sabbath because why would I ask him to move or do something on my behalf when it's something? So I just thank him all day on the Sabbath. I thank him for the day of rest. I thank him for his sacrifice. I thank him for the work that he did already in the 6 days. And I just really came to that revelation not long ago that I'm not going to ask him for anything. Ask him to do for me on the Sabbath because it is his day of rest. And so it's inappropriate or wrong for me to ask for something. And so thanks for letting me share that.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Verse 8 will close here. For the Son of Man is Master or Lord even of the Sabbath. What can that possibly mean? Well, we've discussed about who Yahshua is already, or was at that time. Remember, he was preferring himself. We answered that in part when we addressed the issue of there is one greater here than the temple. And so, when he considered who he was in the past, who he had been, who and what he had been, was he not the one speaking with Moses and the children of Israel? Being the messenger from the Father to teach them about the Sabbath? And what is pleasing to do on the Sabbath? There are certain things we don't do just simply as just bullet pointing and check them off, but we do them all. We do all things from the heart. So what Yahweh was really doing was giving us a framework in which we operate on the Sabbath. If we remain within that, we'll do very well. Because remember, it's still ultimately, we're sons of men too. I mean, my parents were human as much as anybody. And so were my grandpa and everybody else. They were flesh and blood as human beings. So it ultimately, now it doesn't mean I get to make any day special, but what it does mean it's my decision whether or not I'm going to do this and how I choose to apply these teachings, as well as it is with anyone else here. That's your decision how you choose to apply it. Yes, Bob.
In a place he says that my yoke is easy and my
Burden is light.
That doesn't mean there's not a yoke, and that doesn't mean that there's not a burden. But when it's compared to what the law was previously, we had the temple, we had the Levites, we had the sacrifices, we had all of these things. But since he came along as a human being and died as a sacrifice for all sacrifices, the yoke is very light now, and it's not hard to obey. That's the bottom line, is to obey Yahweh's voice. But what we have to do today to do that obedience is very, very minor. That's the point I'm trying to get across. Anybody can do it. You know, and you have to give up some things that you normally would do on a Sabbath Saturday, you know, as far as your work is concerned. But, you know, I'm looking around the room where a lot of people have managed to do this for quite some time. 51 years in my case. I had 2 emergencies since I was in the refrigeration business. But the yoke is easy. Anybody can do it.
We can wrap this up with a few words from Ecclesiastes 12. We're going to read pick it up in verse 9, but 13 and 14 are the pertinent ones here. Moreover, because the preacher was wise, it's Ecclesiastes 12, verse 9. Moreover, because the preacher was wise and still taught the people knowledge, yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. And the preacher sought out to find acceptable words. What was written was upright, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear Elohim and keep all his commandments, for this is man's all. For Yahweh will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it be good or evil.
Hallelujah.
Tom?
I was saying something about the hardness, the difficulty, and that principle anticipated by Yahshua clear back in Deuteronomy 30 was, in verse 10 of Deuteronomy 30, if you shall hearken unto the voice, the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to keep his commandments and his statutes which are written in the book of the Torah or law, and if you turn unto Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, here's the principle, and with all your soul. Verse 11 of Deuteronomy 30, for this commandment which I command you this day is not hidden from you, neither is it too hard for you. I don't know how, it's this far off in the King James, but literally in the Hebrew, it's not too hard. It is not in heaven that you should have to go up to heaven and so forth, or come down. For the word is very near you and in your mouth, that you may be able to perform it. So clear back in ancient Israel on that so-called, so terrible, I hate that phrase, Old Testament, the earlier writings, he's saying this is not too hard for you. I'm with you, I'll empower you, I'll strengthen you. Because his character, thankfully, is consistent now and through all eternity. And so all this term is about, as I was talking earlier today when I first got here with David, the way of the transgressor, the scripture says, is hard. What they go through with their sins and their blindness is hard compared to the burden with Messiah is a yoke, it's easy and light. It's a burden, like Bob says, but comparatively speaking, no contest.
Okay, well, we're out of time, so we'll close here, and we'll be back at 3 o'clock. David Gibson for the main message. Praise Yahweh.